Good evening and welcome to another broadcast of Livelihood. This evening, we're going to be having a conversation about culture, trusting the process, and really digging into what your company says and what they mean. We know these are uncertain times and that your livelihood and how that connects to your life and your career are critically important. So here to join me are Mike and Harold. You've seen us before in prior chats. We're so thrilled to be back together and really kick off this conversation. So gentlemen, welcome. I know that we're really anxious to kind of dive in and also really get into this topic.
Great topic.
Happy to be here. This will be fun.
Yeah.
So when we think about, trusting the process, right? Culture. I mean, we've all been parts of different organizations. I really feel like culture is ever evolving, especially in the current climate. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of not knowing what will happen, right? And we can't ignore that politics have made their way into our everyday lives in a way that maybe they at one time weren't. So Mike, Harold, I'd love to hear your concepts of how you've navigated these waters, trusted the process, and maybe even built out your own process to have that stability.
I think it's a great question. And I think it's a great foundation for all of this. The phrase trust the process doesn't necessarily mean that the process is right. It means trust means let me understand it. Let me embrace what's there that I can use. But as I get better at this, as I learn more and I get my footing, then I'm going to be able to go, okay, now I'm going to build my own process. I'm going to really layer my stuff on top of what this organization is trying to do. Some organizations are going to embrace the fact that they want you to be independent. They're going to be inclusive. There are other organizations that are very patriarchal, authoritative, old-fashioned, pick your term, that's going to be harder to do. And I think that's where the question of what motivates me to stay here? How do I grow? Have I hit kind of a wall? And is that wall to the point where do I need to look elsewhere? That's where that comes from. But the whole idea of understanding the culture, the processes, the way the company operates is an incredibly strong learning experience that you can take pieces of that through the rest of your career.
And how do you recommend that someone really thinks their way through that? Just reflecting from a personal state, I was at an organization and I felt like I'd kind of hit a wall. Mm-hmm. It was very patriarchal. I didn't fit the bill of mm-hmm. what future opportunities looked like. And, either positively or negatively, they were very transparent about that. So it kind of freed me to go into another direction. Reflecting back on that, I've often wondered if I moved in that direction too quickly, if I would have benefited from some grounding in, okay, what is this that I'm looking at?
Well, I think what you're saying there, by the way, your example is awesome. And it's very typical. I went into a place that on the outset looked like I could really kick butt. I could really do well there. Got in there and found, the way they operate, the way they think, and the way they move through things didn't fit with how I do it. Now, by the way, that you've described probably the first 5 years of my work history, the same thing. and I may be polite when I say 5 years, it might have been a lot longer, but some of that was my learning. When I look back, it was like, okay, am I putting it all on them? And to summarize that beautifully, there's just a real quick Mark Twain quote that when I was 18 years old, I could not believe how stupid my father was. When I turned 25, I was amazed how much he had learned. And, not that that's every case every time, but there's some case about, okay, so what is it about me that I need to get better at? What is it organizationally that I found a wall, a stumbling block? And what are those things that I can accept, but what are the ones that are showstoppers? Like my showstopper is disrespect. Mm. If I'm in a place where it's okay to slam other people and it's okay to be, going beyond that idea of being sarcastic into making damaging comments, I'm not there long. Does that help?
It does. And I would say within that also requires people to really take an accounting of what they're willing to accept. I read somewhere where it said, if you make a transition, make a list, like what's on your list and does this fit the bill?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I share a similarity in that disrespect and also, any type of dishonesty.
Yeah.
It's not going to trend well, and it doesn't align with the work that I do. And I'm sure someone else could do it and do it just fine. But I think that early in career, you don't feel like you have the latitude to make those decisions. Yeah. When really you do, before we joined the live, we were talking about choice and that there's always another choice. There's always another deal. And to really be thoughtful and thorough, in that alignment. And Harold,
yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
You and I are both going to ask Harold a question.
No, I'm listening, and I'm learning a lot here. This is great.
My question to you, Harold, is, both of us kind of put down our showstoppers, our line in the sand, choose whatever term you want. But, mine is disrespect. Sounds like Cynthia's is dishonesty. What are yours?
Communication is critical. Like you, my first couple of jobs, I was very disciplined in trying to stay it out. This is not for me, but I'm just going to stick it out. 3 years is my minimum. I have to stick it out for 3 years. 3 years in a day, I walked as fast as I could to turn everything in to get to the next opportunity. And that opportunity was one where I thought that there was a cultural match. The finances were right. The bennies were good. The product's solid. But the culture was not. And like Cynthia, I'm rethinking, so how could I have done this better? Should I have stayed longer? Is it money, or what are the key determinants of success and comfort in a position like this? Am I leaving opportunity on the table if I continue to work in a corporate environment? Am I limiting myself in expression and just in general by working for someone else?
I think there's a really interesting question beyond that. Did I jump too fast?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
I've done that.
Right.
I have too. And I jumped right into a fire pit.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like Tinder dating. I have no direct experience. I want to be clear about that. But,
I've read the book. Yeah, heard the experiences.
Saw the movie. Saw the video.
So yeah, did we jump too fast? Did we buy on just reading the brochure instead of doing a little more due diligence to determine what is really the situation here?
Mm-hmm.
That getting back to the conversation of culture conversation, that's critical, and it comes with experience to have the words, the phrases, those past experiences to know exactly what question I need to ask to ensure that I'm getting what I need to learn before I make this decision.
Can I bring up a tool that I use in my coaching practice around this?
Please.
So what I have people do is build out the Nirvana list. And the Nirvana list is not a narrative. It is a series of bullet points around what the next thing should look like. And I've had people write Nirvana lists that had 4 bullets. I had one person that had 45. Now, the guy that had 45 had the dental plan included. I mean, he was a little over the top on it. But the point is, a Nirvana, I'll explain the name in a moment, but the reason the Nirvana list works is it grounds you. Mm-hmm. And it grounds you in 2 ways. Number one, as you're looking at the next thing, and sometimes, and you were saying it beautifully, I just looked at the brochure, you were saying that, Harold. The idea is we want to move so badly that we don't do enough due diligence. And the way to have you now have a checklist with a Nirvana list.
Yeah.
And, my rule of thumb is know the ones that are the hard stops, the ones that, okay, these got to be there. But you'll never find 100%, but you might 70%, 80%. You're probably now within the acceptable range.
Yeah.
And having that kind of list is really good. I won't go into it here, but I actually use that as a job research tool. There's ways to plug in that content online to actually search for jobs. But the idea is now when you, particularly with the marketplace heating up, if you're looking at a couple different things, now you've got this list to go, okay, do I have 7 to 10? I have that with one I have only 5. Decision starts to get a lot clearer.
Agreed.
Yeah.
One thing I find really interesting as it's making its way into company cultures, and I'm sure you both can agree with this, is for a long time it felt like DE&I initiatives were separate, and that we weren't having conversations about race. We weren't having conversations about racial injustice, that it was more just the ho-hum training everyone had to do so the company could check the box that they weren't liable. Case in point, I was on a call this afternoon with their children of civil rights leaders. So Alma Vivian, Shoshana Herschel, their fathers were critical figures in the civil rights movement. And they were talking about hate, and it was in a variety of niche topics within this broad conversation. But I remember thinking, 2 years ago, this was not happening in this context at companies. It was still very quiet. And when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or, diversity, equity, and belonging, right? And when we think about how that's starting to culturally align as it should, how does that move into your Nirvana list? How does that assimilate in?
I think your comment, the word you use there, belonging. I think if you summarize what I think you described beautifully is, I think there's been a desire to be inclusive. And I'm not using that from a racial standpoint. I'm using that from an openness standpoint. To me, there's been 2 philosophies, and this has been in hiring and in some leadership areas. Exclusion is prove to me you can do this. Mm-hmm. There's a well-known company that when you look at the way they hire you, they want you to run through a series of gauntlets, a series of steps to prove you can work here. Mm-hmm. There's other organizations that say, we're going to start with the premise you're good, and then we're going to see how much we align. That's inclusion. The other one is exclusion. I think what you're seeing with DEI, and I think this experience you had today, which sounds awesome.
It was. I'm trying to get you guys the links to share external because it was pretty cool.
Which is inclusion. You know what? We all want to be here. We all value everybody that's here. Let's figure out what we can do with that. Because you know what? If we're all kind of paddling in the same direction, with as much of the same energy as possible, we're going to kick butt. And I think that's the key part here is the idea that DEI is this amorphous thing. It's good business. It's also good culturally. People will stay longer. You will have less retention issues. There's very good business reasons to do this. And this goes to the heart of company culture. As you're evaluating this place, is this a place you want to hang around, or is this a transactional stop in your career? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you want to be in places where it's not.
So that brings up a couple of interesting points. What I learned in some of my haste and some of non-haste in this discussion is that it is a conversation that you're having with the company. And the company, in my opinion, I'm most interested if they grow and learn from this discussion and they value what my concerns are. If the answer is, yeah, it's what it is, this is it, take it or leave it. Well, I'm pretty sure that's not where I'm going, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we have a couple of people involved or engaged. Our community is this, or, there are options related to the solutions that you're looking for. Okay, so that's fine. That wasn't a hard stop. That wasn't a dead end. That was, we can continue this conversation, or you're free to roam about the cabin. Mm-hmm. We're fine with that. So that's good. On the other hand, there are some people who are really good with just providing the conversation, but not necessarily following up with the details. And that was some of the frustration that I kind of fell into. And I thought, you know what? I think I can do this better by myself. I can run with scissors when I want to. I can eat the paste and no one's going to care. Or said differently, I can explore opportunities from a corporate perspective that allow me to try to build an enterprise that has a culture, an open culture that attracts people who are open-minded and are engaged versus those who are closed and non-engaged. So again, been working at it for a few years, still working through some of the kinks. Don't doubt that there are times when you look in the rearview mirror and you're thinking, you know, I probably could have shut my mouth a little longer and done a lot better. But these are times to live, you know.
Thanks for those flashbacks, by the way.
Caught you right in the pit of the stomach.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
Well, and you look back and you go, was that really a problem?
Yeah, was that a have to have or kind of a nice to have?
Yeah.
Like, now that when you think about it from a multiplicable, you're like, was that really, But at the time, it felt, and Mike, you had mentioned this, that essentially what's real to someone is real to them.
Yeah.
At that moment.
At that time, it was very real.
But you know what you just described, and what I think we all described, was in the moment, you're going to feel something really, really strong, whether super positive or super negative. That is not the time to make a critical decision.
At all.
At
all.
Yep.
And so when you're, so to bring this back to what we're talking about, when you have a collision, like, I am so mad that my company is doing this, that's not the time to write that note. That's not that. Yeah, like, you're laughing, Harold, because I know you and I wrote that note.
Yes, we wrote that, and we pressed send. Yes, we did.
Yeah, we did. We all did, right?
We all did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we feed a few people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we were feeling very like others needed to know this note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, I shot that flare off in the office.
There you go. The critical thing for Google, just to add a little point, I can schedule it to send later.
Mm-hmm.
So in the moment of this red hotness, I can schedule a time that allows me to kind of cool off, go back, reread, and undo the death that I was about to create. So yeah, it's maturity and time.
But you know what? It's a method. And I think what you if you think about it, there's the maturity aspect of it. But what we're talking about for anybody at any point in their career is that pause moment.
Yeah.
And I wish when I was 25 years old and I was a director in a hospital chain and I didn't say what I said when I walked into that office that one day. You can see I'm having the flashback here. The interesting thing to me is, had I had that method to go walk around the building, step away, write it on a piece of paper, write it in a text to yourself, whatever, pause, capture it, pause, and then decide what the action step you're going to do is.
Yeah.
I think that's a critical thing out of this is when you're in conflict with your culture, how do you deal with that conflict?
Another interesting component would be if I am a candidate in the DEI category and I want to be included, I want the job, I may not have the ability, the experience, or the wisdom for that patience, for that pause, for that thought. And I just have to fight through it. And the anxiety that develops as a result of that could be a little bit of a challenge. So maybe we can talk about, if I'm not experienced, if I'm not comfortable in the culture, if I'm new to the company, how would I work through some of those things? How would I adapt to that culture?
I love the smile that Cynthia was just popping.
Yeah, I do too.
So I guess that's who's going next.
No, I'm thinking of some experiences that I've had recently. Our instinct is good at telling us when there is a problem. Our instinct is horrible at helping us identify what the problem is.
Yeah.
Because our instinct is 50, 60,000 years out of date, right?
Right.
It's designed to keep us alive in extreme conditions and not get eaten by wild animals. Well, now we're inside. And so I think that something that's helped me through transition and being new, because even as a leader, you're still new, is give yourself grace to say, I'm new and I want to ask questions for understanding. And it's
Beautiful. Okay. Yeah. I think what you said is so important, and that is a lot of the work I do in coaching. And I know Harold is, you, as you work with organizations that are coming online, that idea of pause, that idea of not trying to have an answer, not trying to respond in the moment, of pausing. And I actually refer to that as check-in. A great way to check in is to say, help me to understand more, or I want to make sure I understood it. It's giving you that moment of, okay, I'm not going to speak, I'm going to listen. It's sort of forced listening.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
And oftentimes,
oh, go ahead, Harold. No, go ahead.
I was saying, oftentimes it's not a personal question that's being asked; it's a professional question.
Yes.
And it's the wisdom to know that in my professional position, here is my answer. You didn't ask Carol that question. You asked Carol's position that question.
Right.
So I'm not what I do. I am what I do, if that makes any sense. So in this position, that's not me. But what I choose to do as a result of that position, I can take ownership in it. So I just need to be responsible.
I think that's really profound, because where it's going to go, and particularly if you're newer in your role, it's going to go to the person. We always go to the person side.
Right.
First and foremost, that you always hear the phrase, I am being attacked. Sometimes I remember there were moments where I was getting raked over the coals by my leader. For a while, I took it personally, but then I realized, you know what? My team is not doing something right.
Right.
And I'm getting a little tired of me getting dragged in going, okay, your team screwed up on this, this, and this. And so what I did, and it's kind of a breakthrough moment in my career, I went back to my team, and instead of just jumping on their case, I brought them in a room. And this is 4 really sharp software engineers who, if any one of them is listening today, you remember this day, because we talked about it. And you know what I said? I brought them in the room and I said, here's the feedback I'm getting. You guys are mediocre. You could have heard a pin drop. And guess what? At that point, it was almost like this. I'm sitting back going, okay, they started cranking. And they built systems, process, methods that was amazing. And that's the whole point, is my learning from that was, okay, I'm walking and I'm going home at night pissed off at everybody that is slamming me. There was a valid reason for what they were saying. But I also didn't go into the idea of let me let that stuff go downhill. I'm going to jump on them. I made a strong statement of, you guys are just okay. And we're paying the price. That resonated with them. Sure. I'd love to say I was a great manager, by the way, but please notice how long it took me to do that. So, yeah.
I think there's that balance, though, and that companies really want to push this 360 feedback concept, which I am personally an advocate against. I think it really, all it does is promote. Remember in the movie Mean Girls, right? Which is, cult classic. And it was kind of the first time that you see, Rachel McAdams, and it was a Tina Fey movie, and they're in her bedroom, Regina George, and they're writing all of this horrible stuff in this anonymous notebook because they're never going to have to face what they're saying. And so what companies do is they say, we're going to give you this 360 evaluation, and it's almost a test of how much you can absorb without being defensive, because if you defend against it, then you're not taking in the advice. And my experiences with that has been kind of similar to yours, Mike, to say, okay. If we're all going to take an opportunity and write in the slap book, I find it just eats culture. It doesn't really contribute to it. And I also find too, in your example, Mike, when you said, look, guys, this is what everyone's perception of you is. People who want to do better will, to your point, write processes. They'll come up with ways to do better. People who don't, they'll say, I'm fine with that. And you'll know who you have.
But you know, and you made a point there. I want to change one word. This is their perception of us.
Yes.
Our team.
Yes.
Nobody's bad here, but guys, we're kind of mediocre. And chosen on purpose because it was not an insult, but it was like, we can keep going like this, but you know what? I don't want to be there. I didn't even have to say that, but and I'd love to make it sound like I was this incredibly great manager. C+ at best. C+ at best. So.
One thing I wanted us to kind of pulse on is talking about process, right? And trusting the process. And we're really coming at this from an internal lens, which is great. Yep. When we look at it from an external, when you're in the process, when you are a candidate, someone sent over a question, how did I handle being in process when I was in between roles? How do you trust that when you don't really know what any of that end looks like? And Mike, I'd love to know, as you coach, how do you coach people through that process?
I think there's a couple things. One is to be inquisitive. In coaching, we actually teach that there's a word that's not a good word to use in a question, which is why, because why can sound as though it's I'm challenging, I'm not happy, I'm threatening. But if you're able to be inquisitive around, I'm curious how this works, or I'm curious how this thing started, or really start to focus in on, okay, you guys seem like you've built this product a certain way, or you do this service a certain way. I'd love to share with you things I've seen. Would that be helpful? And that's kind of a moment of inclusion or exclusion. It's a way for you to start early on, before you even get in there, to understand their openness. So you're not judging the process. You're trying to understand the process. You're also trying to understand their openness to their openness to look at other things. Does that make sense?
No, I think that's very insightful, because when you're in process, it can feel like you're kind of just hanging out on a limb when actually you're not. We've talked about how candidates have a lot more power and autonomy and authority than they think they do. And that, to the point we were, illustrating earlier, don't just read the brochure, ask questions, ask specific questions in a very particular way. So that I always tell people, in the same way that a company is going to ask you very similar questions and then compare your scores, ask the same of them.
Exactly.
And compare your answers.
Cynthia, I think you shared a data point a few conversations back related to the turnover of positions currently, and that things are happening in terms of transitioning faster than before. What is it, 18, 24 months on the West Coast? Is that what
Yeah, I think 18 months on West Coast is pretty standard. And then when you look at West Coast companies, specifically in tech, and Mike, you probably have a better pulse on this than I have, 25 to 30% turnover.
Yeah, easily. You in many of the really hardcore tech companies, it's about 12 months, which surprises people, but that's really accurate. Nationally, it is 4.3 years. But keep in mind, that includes government and finance. And finance is very slow moving. So it is shrinking everywhere. Here on the West Coast, a little bit more, because we are more tech-centric and less government-centric.
And so what that means to me is this conversation that we're having is going to happen more frequently as people find themselves moving from position to position to position. So being able to understand those hot buttons that, as we discussed earlier, really cause me problems and hassles, and being mature enough to use your words and have a discussion with the hiring team on, tell me a little bit about this, and being able to read the feedback you get in terms of what you're describing, Mike, and being open versus not being open in terms of culture and communication. So I think this is something we're going to have to get comfortable with, whether we want to or not.
The opening of my book literally has, if you are 30 years old and you want to work to your 65, guess how many times you're changing roles. So yeah, this is what we're talking about, is developing this as a skill set, really.
That's right. That's right.
And it's a life journey.
It is. And you better get good at it, or you'll have flashbacks like you saw all of us having here at the beginning.
It takes some practice. It takes some practice to
really
get halfway decent at it.
Yeah.
Or to not go for the jump ball, right? To just let the ball go. It's fine. Perfectly fine.
Yep.
So this has been great. Again, this whole concept behind Livelihood was allowing us to have these specific open conversations.
Yep.
So that we could explore some things that we really couldn't wrap into if we were reading a book or something like that. Not that books are bad, but when we're just going down that script, it limits our discussion. So I'm really happy that this transition happened.
Same.
And we pursued an open discussion versus a closed one as we define our culture.
Inclusive. Yes. You like that? Just to wrap it in.
Little twitch there in the eye for a moment. I think my summary is what I think we're doing is we're talking about topics, but we want to get down into more of the actionable stuff around the topics. Yeah. As opposed, there's nothing worse for me than watching a bunch of talking heads. And what I've loved about what we started to do, and I think we're continuing to do, and getting our really as this community develops around us, is the idea of, okay, let's take this topic, today of company culture, but let's talk about what you do with it. And I'm really encouraged by how this is becoming more and more natural for us. I mean, today it's all right. Know your lines in the sand. Know the ones that are just going to violate your core principles, but also know to take that step back before you fire that flare gun in the office, or as Harold, you said, hit the send button. How do you? Funny how when we hit that one, we're all going, oh wait. Yeah.
There's that moment of do I, don't I?
Yeah. And
recall.
Yeah, recall send, and you're like, this is gonna work. This is gonna work.
No,
never works.
No.
And I think that's the beauty of this is we'll always take a topic, but we're going to really ground it back into, okay, we're not going to be amorphous here. We're going to talk about what can you do with this?
Yeah.
I think that's really our mantra.
Well, and we're grounded in a common mission to help people have livelihood in their careers and their life. I think pandemic has taught us we've got to be grounded in reality, and that we used to have the privilege of at least thinking these things were separate. Now they're very connected, and really owning that connection. And for anyone who wants to reach out to us, we have an email. We are livelihoodproject4@gmail.com. And of course, yes, because there's 4 of us, the lovely Miss Sophia. So we would be happy to correspond. Of course, LinkedIn is also a great option to chat, to connect, to raise any questions. And Mike, like you were saying, as we get this ball spinning further, we'll do more with the live community and really engage. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to have these conversations. They're just not really sure how to go about them. And everyone says, oh, it's experience or what have you. And it's like, right, but how do I get that? Or how do I ask someone this question? And I think we're providing that safe space. And thank you both for including me in this.
I thought you included us.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I was going to say, we included you there.
I saw what you did there.
I think, my closing remark, and it will be my closing remark, is this is really about a sense of community.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we're as a society craving is, let's build a place that's safe. We can talk about the stuff that, I can't really process on my own. Not that we're going to be giving advice here necessarily, but we're going to really open it up to go, okay, here's what you can think about. And I think that's the beauty of the Livelihood Project.
Agreed.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Have a fantastic rest of your week and weekend, and I'll see you guys next week.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Cynthia.
Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye.